Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Spencer Cronk, and I'm the new city manager here in Austin, and it is a pleasure to be in front of you today. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out and participating in this important decision that we will be making as a community. I also want to thank those that are viewing at home and those that are participating throughout this month of engagement. In the short 2 months that I've been here, I have spent a lot of time out in community talking to many individuals about some important aspects of the future of Austin. They range from our affordability to mobility issues, but at the end of the day, one of the most important requirements of how we move forward as a city is how we deal with public safety. And the person in charge of our public safety is our police chief. And I had a decision to make on who are we going to put forward as a candidate for our next chief. And last Monday, I said that Brian Manley would be the lone candidate that we would vet as a community. And that process would take place over the next month. And then at the end of that month, I would decide if we need to go for a national search or if I would put Brian Manley's name forward to be our next police chief. And each of you are critical in that conversation. I've heard from many of you, but I need to hear from more. And so I'm excited for the opportunity to engage in that discussion today, over the next few weeks, because each of your opinions and each of your perspectives are critical in how we move forward as a city together. So today is the start of a public conversation. We'll be able to hear for the first time Brian Manley's vision and perspectives of what he wants to bring to the police department. We'll have some opportunities for community members to ask questions, to dialogue. And in the beginning, we're going to hear some perspectives from our quality of life chairs. We have a few of them here today. Some might still be on their way. If they can join us in time, that would be great. But we're going to start out with those perspectives as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our MC of the evening, and that's Judy Maggio. She is KLRU's editorial director for news and public affairs. She leads Decibel, a multi-platform reporting project for KLRU. Please join me in welcome Judy.
Thank you so much, City Manager Cronk, and I understand that you've already discovered the beauties of and the challenges of allergies in Central Texas, which are especially bad in the springtime. I am so honored and delighted to be here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and take a seat, if you don't mind. We've got a lot of moving parts and a lot of ground to cover. But like so many of you, I truly love and care about the future of this city, and I think it's always critical to keep these lines of communication open, and I applaud the city for having these forums for not only the police chief, but also for some other critical issues like the city budget. So thank you all for caring enough to drive through traffic and get here and weigh in on this very important topic of who's going to lead our all-important police force. I want to give you a few housekeeping notes. You can kind of think of me, since we're talking about APD, you think of me as the traffic cop tonight. I'm going to be trying to move things along despite some potential log jams. So we've asked everyone to weigh in on questions for Interim Chief Manley, and there's several ways you can do that, so listen carefully. One is through Twitter. The hashtag is #OurNextChief. #OurNextChief. We have people monitoring Twitter to ask those questions for you. Another way is to go in the comments section on our Facebook page. KLRU's page is airing this live, as is Decibel ATX, our news and public affairs page. So that's KLRU, Austin PBS, or Decibel, as in a loudness, Decibel ATX, okay? And that's the Facebook page that we're live streaming on. Those are two ways you can weigh in as well. And I do believe that the City of Austin is sharing our feed tonight. And the final way is note cards. We have note cards on see the lady in the beautiful bright blue jacket? There are note cards there, index cards, so you may write down a question and just leave it on the table. And those are the ways we're going to be asking questions tonight, but I do want to introduce someone who's going to be helping me. Uma Garba, if you could, yeah, here she is. She's going to be your voice tonight in many ways. The folks who behind the scenes are going to be kind of curating questions, and she's going to be asking them, and she is the language accessibility coordinator, is that right? For the city of Austin. So Uma, we thank you so much for playing that important job tonight, playing that important role for us. Now we want to bring up on stage some of the people that represent various communities and allow them to have a voice in city policy. And I'm going to ask our Quality of Life commissioners to come up now as I call you. Kenneth Thompson, who's Chair, African American Resource Advisory Commission. And we are short on microphones, so you guys may have to pass these 2-stick mics. I figured that wouldn't be a problem. We have Jill Ramirez, who is the chair of the Hispanic Latino Quality of Life Advisory Commission. Jill, thanks for being here. Debasri Dasgupta, who is the Asian American Quality of Life representative. Debasri. And is Dr. Martinez in yet? I think we were waiting on Dr. Martinez. Well, if Dr. Martinez makes it, then we'll invite him up on the stage. When we've had some of these discussions in the past, the city manager's kind of broken it down into 3 categories. So those are the 3 categories we want to talk to our quality of life commissioners about. And once we hear from them and we weigh in for about 15 minutes, that's when we'll bring up Chief Manley, who will be giving his vision and his statement, and then I'll be sitting down to talk with him and allowing you all to ask the questions that you'd like to ask tonight. But first of all, we want to start with our Quality of Life Commissioner. So first of all, what are key characteristics that you think we need in our next chief of police and in representing the people in your community? What are key characteristics that you think our next chief needs to have? Kenneth, we'll start with you. Or do you want to start?
Ladies first.
Ladies first. I like you.
You're so kind. Thank you. I believe that the key characteristics for our next chief of police must be someone who's compassionate to all communities, who's level-headed, who is honest, and understands that Austin has a lot of different parts that have a lot of different needs, but is able to bring all of those parts together to work together.
A unifier, not a divider. Got it.
The one thing I would say is integrity. And that's integrity really to hold the system accountable, right? To ensure that we all experience the same level of safety within our community. And so my benchmark is integrity and leading toward transparency in the system also. And then also creativity in terms of what we're going to do to take this police force and make it, you know, the best police force in the nation.
Let me ask you something while you still have the mic. Do you think, you talked about transparency, do you think up to date APD has been transparent enough?
I would say that there's pockets that we've seen some, but I think there's an abundance of more opportunity there also. And I think part of that, and it's just not, I think, part of APD. I think also when you think about the Citizen Review Board, making sure that the citizens feel like they have an adequate voice in decisions made when it comes to their differences, when things that they see that happen with APD.
All right. Debasri, I know that you wanted to talk about some characteristics that you feel are important.
Actually, transparency was one of the things I did wish to talk about, but I feel that he needs to be open, available to all citizens, and as you spoke about the Citizens Review Panel, I think that is definitely a wonderful device for people to be able to stay in contact with the police department.
And I want to add one other, diversity. I think diversity is important also, and the way our police department looks to the rest of our community. And I think so. I think valuing diversity not just in language, but those who are hired and those who have an opportunity for promotions within the department. I think those things are valuable also.
Before we move on to current issues, anything else you want to add on characteristics?
I think what was mentioned about the transparency and being able to get to understand the diversity of Austin and being able to act on that understanding that different groups have different needs. And for me, as a Latina woman, and a lot of people that we have relationships with, that compromises with the immigrant community. And so I'm hoping that we continue the same kind, that he has a characteristic enough to be able to address some of the immigrants' needs.
Let's move on now. The next area, broad area that we're talking about this evening is, what do you believe are the key challenges that need to be immediately addressed by the next chief of police? Key challenges. Who wants to start with that one? DeBresser? Yeah.
I think equity across all races is definitely
equity across all
yes,
races.
All races. You have to ensure that all people across the board, regardless of race, regardless of religion, that they all feel safe in the city.
Do you think that's happening now?
You know, I have a very high opinion of Austin, and I think it is happening enough for us to feel good about the city we live in. But I'm sure there are pockets where this doesn't exist. So I think that's what needs to be addressed.
Are there other key challenges that you think are going to be facing our next chief?
No, I think
That's the main one.
I think safety is probably the key issue.
Mm-hmm. We all want to feel safe.
Yes.
And I think also one of the keys is how are we going to use data? Right? How are we going to use data, to improve the outcomes of those folks who are most likely to, have contact with law enforcement? And what I mean by that is that, when you look at the percentage of people of color in this community, we tend to have worse outcomes in our interaction with law enforcement. And so one of the key things is how is he going to use data, in terms of training and promoting this city while also being mindful of the images that impacts law enforcement around the country at the same time.
Do you think that the de-escalation training that started in January, do you know much about that, or do you think that that's going to help?
Well, I think any time that you start using the term de-escalation from a place perhaps where you've not used it before is a good thing. And now I think, but seeing the outcomes, I think so, the dashboard, seeing the outcome or how those things are really working, or really matters, because I think at times we can use words, sometimes to cover up things, but I think also, again, using the data. So once we have started this de-escalation process, right, what do those numbers look like in terms of how they impacted the community in a positive or negative manner?
Okay. And Jill?
Well, I think the hardest thing for him is going to probably face is how do you address that narrative that exists right now between pro-police and the anti-police. And so that, to me, is going to be a key for how successful he's going to be. Because right now you have two different groups and may not agree as of how to address some of the issues. Mm-hmm. So
when you say pro and anti-police, that's a pretty bold statement. So who would fall into the anti-police category? I
think that there's, rightly so, there's some people that feel they have not been heard, they have not, you'd feel like that perhaps not everyone in the police department, but a few at Apples might have done stuff and there was not enough transparency. And so that has created that climate. So for him, he's going to have to really work with that community to be able to work with them to improve that relationship and bring everyone to at least a point where we can work together.
And bridge some gaps. So who would be in the pro-police camp? Everybody else, I guess? Or
Well, I think there's a lot of people who understand that when you're in trouble, you call the police, right? But they're not vocal.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they're not heard. So I think we need to give both sides chances to be open and talk about it.
One of the concerns that I heard from the big city police chiefs when SB4 was up for debate before it passed was they felt like members of the immigrant community would be even less likely to come forward to talk about crimes because they'd be fearful of being deported. Have you seen that happen in your community?
Yes, in our community, there's a lot of fear because ICE happens to be around and picking people up. So absolutely, there's a lot of fear in the immigrant community. We are in Austin where we have a lot of support for immigrants. So I know that groups are hoping that they continue working with Chief Manley in a positive way, the way he has in the past.
Okay. The final question, and I just want to give everybody a reminder to, especially if you're just arriving, don't forget to turn off your cell phones. We're doing a live broadcast and we're hearing some cell phones pop off. So anyway, just a friendly reminder. The final question is, what issues do you believe the Austin Police Department must be prepared to address in the future, say in the next 5 years? You know, we are a rapidly growing city with more than 100 people moving here every day. That's created so many challenges with gentrification, with traffic, with infrastructure. So as the chief of police, our next chief, what do you think he really needs to start getting ready for that's going to happen in the future?
I think he has to get ready for the next generation. I think the next generation will challenge us on data. I think the next generation will challenge us on being factual. I think the next generation will challenge us on being inclusive, right? And making sure that their voice is a part of the equation. So I think the biggest challenge that he will have going forward, whoever that may be, is how do you embrace that next generation who perhaps see law enforcement as a little different than perhaps a generation before them. So I think that's going to be one of the toughest challenges that he's going to confront.
Thank you. Jill?
I think having equity, across all parts of the city, where I have my office and where I live, because that's where my office is Montopolis, and I can tell you that we have wonderful officers when we have incidents of things happen, and they're able to respond quickly, respond with respect, and that there's that equity that no matter where you are, whatever part of town, that everybody needs to be treated with respect the same way. Great.
To Brosser?
One of the things I feel that they should really look into is hiring to make sure that the police force is representative of the city's population. One of the challenges they probably will face is to be aware of cultural differences, language barriers, and also that they need to be, particularly now, very aware of the immigration laws and about how ICE agents are handling situations. These are some of the challenges I feel the police force have ahead of them.
Thank you all so much. We have Kenneth Thompson, Jill Ramirez, Dabasri Dasgupta. We appreciate your perspective and input tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you could just leave the mics there on the chair. And now we're going to bring up the man on the hot seat, the man of the hour tonight, Interim Police Chief Brian Manley, who's going to be sharing his vision, his experience in this role for the past 18 months, and where he would like to see the job go in the future. Chief Manley.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out to the town hall meeting tonight. Austin's on the verge of making a very important decision, that for the police chief for our city. I have had the good fortune and opportunity to serve in that role for the past year and a half after spending 28 years with the Austin Police Department, a department I love, a community that I love, growing up in Austin, going to school in Austin. This is home for me, so this is a very important decision. I want to spend my time tonight before we get into the question and answer, though, not really going through my biography, my background. I think there's a lot that's been said about that. I think you've got a handout that covers a lot of that. But what I really think is important that we talk about tonight is my philosophy on policing and really my vision for the Austin Police Department. I think that's an important discussion, and it's timely. And I've been in this role for 18 months, and so as I talk about this, some of my vision will be forward-looking and where I want to take the department. Some of it will actually be talking about things we've already done. When I was asked back in November of 2016 to take over as the interim police chief, I asked then interim city manager Lane Hart one question, really, and I asked her, are you looking for a police chief, or are you looking for a placeholder, someone just to kind of keep things going until you find your police chief? Because I told her I can't be a placeholder, and policing cannot stand still and wait. It's just too dynamic, it's too changing, and we cannot stand still. And thankfully, she was looking for someone to take control of the department and to make change where change was necessary. And we've done that over the past 18 months. I inherited a great department, but no police department can stand still in time. We have to pay attention to what's going on. I think that we're coming off of really maybe a decade of police reform, where we are looking at the national level, where there has been reform directed really from the previous presidential administration, and it came through many different ways. And I want to talk about a few of those because it's important. I think maybe the seminal work in all of this was the work that came out of the President Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, where he brought together police leaders from across this country to redefine policing, to address some of the challenges that we were having across the country with policing, with our tactics, with how we were approaching policing. And what came out of that was a report that came out in 2015, and we took that report here in the Austin Police Department, and we really used it as a report card to measure what are we doing in Austin? How do we stack up against what the national, really the experts and expectations are? And we looked for areas that we met, and we looked for areas where we needed to improve. And I think that was a really strong driving force at the national level. Another thing that we saw really take place during this time was reform driven through the Department of Justice, the DOJ. We saw a lot of departments that either went under a review, some went under a consent decree, some got technical letters of assistance, but all departments learned from what those reviews showed. All departments understood best practices and things that maybe we needed to do to reform ourselves. But thirdly, and I think really importantly, what was occurring at the national level too, was an interest in police data, an interest in understanding what was going on around the country. As police departments, we collect a lot of data. A lot of that data is on the crime that occurs in our community. We compare ourselves to other communities to see how safe are we. But what we weren't doing was taking a look at the larger issues in policing. And the Police Foundation came out with the Police Data Initiative, the PDI program, where they wanted to collect at a national level data on police use of force incidences, deadly encounters, really so we could get a look at practices that were occurring across the country and maybe identify communities and departments that had some really novel programs in place. The Austin Police Department was first in on that. We wanted in, we gave our data, and we've been giving our data since then. They've reached out to us recently wanting to engage us in another project just because of how complete our data set is with what we've provided them. So again, I think there's been a lot of reform that's taken place at the national level. And although it may have slowed down at the national level, we cannot slow down at the local level. We have to pay attention to change. We have to pay attention to what needs to happen. And to that, I think it's important tonight to really talk about the vision statement that I'm putting in place for the Austin Police Department. Because if I'm going to talk about my vision, it ought to match the vision statement that I'm putting in place. And the vision statement for the Austin Police Department, this being the end state that you want to get to, is we want to be a department that is trusted and respected by all and that collaborates with our community to make Austin the safest city in America. Now, there are some important parts of that I want to break down. First of all, we want to be trusted and respected by all. Austin's a very diverse community. We all know that. Policing doesn't have the best history with all communities. Austin has a very large immigrant population, many of whom may have come here from countries that maybe the corruption in policing is what led them here in the first place. And so to expect them to come here and have trust with American policing, that's a high ask. We understand that we have to break down some of that and really build trust within those communities. But we also have to understand the history of American policing. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, American policing has not always been on the right side of issues. We've been on the wrong side of issues, and we've learned from that. We can go back to the civil rights era and look at that, or we can look currently at things that we see broadcast that are occurring in communities around the country, and sometimes that occur here. We have to learn from that. The second part, that collaborates with the community. The second part of the vision statement that's so important, because we cannot succeed if we try and do this by ourselves. Policing is not something that should be done to the community. It has to be done with the community through partnership. And that's the work that we have to do collaboratively. We have a history here of working with the community, and I would actually cite an example, and I know Chaz is here. We worked with the Austin Justice Coalition here about a year ago when we were looking at a de-escalation policy, really a pillar policy for any police agency. We've trained de-escalation at the police department for years, but we never had a policy that covered de-escalation. And if it's truly important to us as a department, then we should have a policy on it. So we were looking at writing our own policy. We were actually working on it when the Justice Coalition came to us and provided us with a policy that they had written that covered use of force and de-escalation. And when we looked at it, they had done a really good job. And we mirrored it up with the work we were doing, and there were a lot of similarities. So we worked with the Justice Coalition on putting together the de-escalation policy that we put in place for the Austin Police Department. Again, I think that's showing a willingness to collaborate at a policy level that you don't see in departments across this country. And here recently, we had the Nation of Islam here. I think Robert Muhammad is here. I think I saw him earlier. They came to us a couple weeks ago because they have a novel idea they want to try here in Austin, where they get involved on the front level of being interactive with the community and maybe helping neighborhoods or communities where they're having issues. Maybe it's gang issues with kids that are not getting along, or school issues. They want to be a part of the solution. We're open to that. Again, we have to collaborate. The last part of the vision that I think is important to hit on is to make Austin the safest city in America. Now, that's a pretty high goal, and we talked a lot about that. Do you set a goal that is so aspirational? But I think you do, because you have to strive for that. Austin currently ranks as the 5th safest major city when it comes to violent crime. But again, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, there are certain parts of Austin that feel safer than other parts of Austin, because there are certain parts of Austin that are safer than other parts. And that's why we have to strive to make all of Austin as safe as possible through collaboration, through proactive policing, through partnerships with the community. So I think the vision statement is a good place to start, but I also think that some of the other key points are diversion. We need to work towards diversion, but I look at that in 2 different ways. The first area for diversion really occurs before the police encounter ever happens. Is there somebody else that can be brought to bear to handle that situation? Because too often today, American police officers are getting called into situations that we may not be the best trained or the best equipped to handle, but we're simply the only ones out there at the time that can handle it. And this often comes to bear when we're dealing with mental health calls and people that are in a mental health crisis. And we've seen time and time again in communities across the country and here at home where those encounters sometimes have a tragic end. We do have a great diversion program here in Austin with the MCOT program, where we do partner with the local mental health authorities and try and divert those calls to the skilled professionals. Last year in 2017, we diverted 1,410 calls through the MCOT program. We had a 93% success rate with individuals that came through the MCOT program that did not have an involuntary act taken against them. They were not arrested, or they were not involuntarily committed to a hospital or a mental institution. Again, we're getting voluntary, we're getting the partnerships, so that's important. But we need to find other ways to divert the police from other calls that maybe we're not the best in that moment to handle. Trust and transparency are key. We live in a day and age where trust is really at the core. Because if we don't have trust, then we're not going to have the partnership with the community that is so important. And again, your Austin Police Department has authorized 1,908 positions for a community of almost 1 million people. There are a lot of places that we can be and a lot of things that we can do, but we have got to partner with the community to really harness the power of this community in policing ourselves, in setting our expectations, and keeping everyone safe. So I think that is key when we look at trust and really legitimacy. If we are not seen as a legitimate authority, as a legitimate institution, then we're going to continue to face those challenges. I want to talk briefly about some of the things that we have already done at the Austin Police Department. Again, being in this role coming up on a year and a half now, I think that this also demonstrates my vision, because it was a great department when I got it, but we needed to make change, and we're always going to need to make change. One of the first things I did is I reorganized the police department. We have 18 commanders in the Austin Police Department, and at that time, only 5 of them oversaw the patrol bureau. And this is where most of the contacts take place. This is really where policing is at the heart. And given the demands on a commander, the administrative demands of that position, the commanders, I didn't believe, had enough time to be involved in relationship building, community engagement, really demonstrating to their officers the importance of all of that. So I restructured the department. We now have 9 commanders that oversee the patrol functions. Half of our commanders now oversee patrol, because my expectation is that they will be involved in the community. They will be attending community meetings. They will be demonstrating to their officers the values that are so important, the techniques, the tactics that they've learned over their career. They should have time to do that, but they'll also have more time to handle the administrative functions, the oversight functions, the review functions that are so important to make sure that we are holding ourselves to our standards and to our policies. So that's critically important. I created a lieutenant position on community engagement. Again, if we're going to be this department that's going to work so hard to engage the community, I wanted one central person that would be kind of overseeing the entire program. So we've dedicated a lieutenant position to oversee that, and she reports directly to the chiefs of the department, and she sits on the floor with us so we can have daily interaction and we can understand where are we coming up short, what can we do better, what should we do different. So I think that was something that was very important that we implemented. I'm a believer in that what you measure is what you get. We've got to send a message to our employees of what is important to us. And to that extent, we've changed the annual evaluation that officers go through to include dimensions on community engagement, community policing, so that they understand it's important enough to us that we're going to evaluate them on that. And brings in the first line supervisor to make sure they pay attention to that, because that is important. And then one other area where we're measuring this is in what you reward, is what your officers will strive for. When you see officers in their full dress uniforms and we've got our ribbons on, those ribbons signify a lot of different things. They may signify heroic actions under dangerous situations. They may signify a life-saving event or personal accomplishments in education or honorable conduct, a lot of things. We didn't have one that covered community engagement, but yet we say we value that. So we created one. Officers can now be rewarded and be recognized for their efforts in the community on building the relationships that, again, we say are so important. And then I think the other key thing that we've done as a department is fair and impartial police training, putting every single Austin police officer through fair and impartial police training. We understand everyone has biases. We're all a product of our upbringing, of our education, of our communities, our neighborhoods, our families, our friends. But in policing, we have to make sure that we don't let that get in the way of the decisions that we make. It cannot influence how we police, because if that were to occur, then we have now challenged really what's at the core of policing today, and that is justice-based criminal enforcement. That is what we have to make sure, is that we're providing justice in an equal and equitable way across the community. And if we come up short on that, then we're going to have problems. A few last things I'll close with in the direction, some things that are undergoing right now that we're focused on. I volunteered our police department to go through an equity assessment this year because I think it's important. The city's equity department just began this program last year, and I believe they only put 5 departments through that. So this is the second cohort, but I felt it was important because we need to measure our policies, our practices, our priorities through an equity lens. And so I look forward to this analysis with the city's equity office and Mr. Brian Oakes as they come in and they review our department and they compare us to that. We're also looking at expanding our training on use of force. We always review our training. After every cadet class, we look at training. What can we do better? What should we do different? And to that extent, we're looking at several different models at a national level. The DOJ has some model use of force policies that we have sent trainers out to go look at, and we're going to begin training to that. The PERF group has a program, again, on some de-escalation training with use of force. These mostly focus on deadly force encounters with individuals not armed with a firearm, armed with maybe a knife or a bat or a club or something, looking for ways to have positive outcomes in those circumstances. There's some national models out there we want to look at, and we want to see what can we do different, what can we do better, and that's something we're going to focus on this year as we go forward as well. And I've probably exceeded my time a little bit on what we've laid out here. I appreciate you giving me a little leeway, but as we close, I just felt it was important. Again, I've been in place for a year and a half, but I've never really had the opportunity to come out and explain my philosophy and my vision. We've been living it for a year and a half. There have been changes based on that, but I felt like you should at least understand my thoughts on policing, and maybe that will inform the discussion on where we go as a department, as a community. Again, a community I love, a community that I've grown up in and had the distinct pleasure of serving for coming up on 3 decades now. So again, thank you all for coming out, and Judy, thank you.
Chief Manley, take a sip of water, relax for a second. I want to tell everybody about how we're going to do the questions again one more time. Yes. Oh, do you want to tell everybody about the questions? Okay. Uma Garma is going to be telling you, she's going to be your voice tonight. We thought this was the most efficient way to ask questions from the audience and for people on social media. So go ahead, Uma.
Yes, Judy, I have a few reminders. Please send your questions. We have a table over there. You can get your little note card, write it down, and then turn it in, and we will read them for you. And also for those that just came in, and if you speak Spanish, we have interpreters that can help you with an equipment, and you will be able to follow the meeting. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Uma. Thank you so much, and we're getting a lot of questions already in, and I want to lay some groundwork first, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience, because you don't need to be hearing me talk. I want to hear from you, and I want to hear from you. This is a bit like a job interview in a way. All of these people are your employers, the City of Austin, and they're asking you questions about the potential of you becoming the permanent police chief. And I think this is a great idea that people have those lines of communication open and feel like there is a lot of transparency. So we thank you for giving us your vision tonight. It's probably nice to finally lay that out after a year and a half on the job. It is an unusual job interview as well, because you've been in the job already for a year and a half, and that's not normally the case. So thanks for being with us. I want to start just overall. What do you think your strengths and weaknesses are? This is a typical job interview question, but what do you think your weaknesses are, your strengths?
You know, I think where I find myself working the hardest to improve is just an overall organization. The information flow that comes into the chief's office, the amount of information that comes in, the flow of that information, the time with which you need to respond so that you can keep the community informed. When I took over as the interim chief, I did not make a chief of staff. That was the position I had served in for Chief Acevedo for a couple of years, serving in the second position in the department and really supporting him. And I was intentional in not doing that at the time, not knowing that it was going to go on this long, but I had reasons why I didn't think it was appropriate to do it at that time. And so I really kind of found myself doing both jobs to a certain extent, and so that has created some difficulties in staying up. I've taken steps to try and mitigate that. But I would say, looking overall, just from an organizational perspective, I think that was maybe the biggest switch from moving from the chief of staff to the chief position, was just the amount of information I had to control, and really not having someone in second chair to help with that. As far as strengths, I feel like I communicate well with the community. I've had a lot of opportunities, whether it be at the scene of a critical incident, or obviously the month of March had this community on our heels, and we had a lot of interaction. I strive really hard to put out accurate and complete information and to do it in a timely manner. I don't always get it right. I will own it when I don't. But I think that being open and really just being as informative as possible and in as timely a manner is important. So I think that I think that's one of my strengths. And then the only other thing that I would add is just really my familiarity with Austin, having spent really all of my life here. Having been here, I guess, since I was 5 years old, and knowing this community, and then having 28 years on with the department, really knowing the department and our capabilities as well.
Before we get to the audience questions, I have one more. It seemed to me, as an outsider looking in, that the situation with the bomber in March was a highlight for you because it must have been kind of bittersweet because people were all saying, he's doing a terrific job. We admire how he's handled this nationwide situation. And everybody was saying, give him the permanent job. And then there were other voices saying, we don't like the way he handled it. We feel like calling the white young man, a troubled young man, was inappropriate, considering sometimes blacks and Latinos who are committing violent crimes aren't always described that way. So talk about that situation from your perspective, because it must have been a bittersweet time.
Judy, I'm going to talk about it, but from a different perspective first, and then I'll get to that. But bittersweet because I saw the excellence of law enforcement that was brought to bear here in Austin between the federal systems, the state, the locals, and just saw a level of cooperation that we haven't seen before, and that is really, I think, such a model for this community that we have been asked to go and speak at the national level about what we did here and how we did it. But our community was under attack, and we lost lives, and we had lives that were forever changed. And so I don't look back with it, without being very aware of what happened to us as a community, as a city, and that can't be lost. There was great work done here. You had almost 800 federal agents in our city working for us, and I sit here and tell you, had they not been here, we would not, in my belief, have brought it to as quick of a resolution as we did. What they brought to bear here was amazing. Our police department did a great job, and we have a lot of resources. But as with any major undertaking like that, were we perfect? No, we were not. There were things that were occurring behind the scenes, in closed doors. There were some interagency issues that were never significant, never got in the way of what we did. But yes, I made some comments throughout that multi-week event that had I had the foresight to realize how they would have been taken, I absolutely would have described them differently. And I'll take the one where I described him as a challenged young man. I had just listened to a 25-minute recording of him describing his life, his activities, describing in detail the bombs that he built, and really no level of remorse. And I was not trying to make excuses for him. I was not trying to minimize what he did. He killed 2 people in our community, seriously wounded others, and I think he tried to kill a couple of our police officers in that very last moment by waiting until they got up to the door to try and take him into custody and detonating that bomb. He could have detonated that anywhere along the way, but he waited till our officers were at the door. This was in no way meant to minimize his conduct. And I think, I know I've heard some of the comments about, well, had this been a person of color, had this been, a person of a different faith or any of that, but I would just ask this community, judge me against me. I don't label people in that way. I just don't do that. I know that some in policing do, and I think if you look across the board, sure, you're going to find that. That's just not how I describe people.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, and I'm going to do 2 of them, and then we'll have Uma do a couple. The first one, top of mind for a lot of people, there's no police contract yet. If the City and Police Association do not reach a contract, can you still lead the department in an effective manner?
The short answer is yes. There are many police departments that operate under Government Code 143, but I do not think it's ideal. I think as a city and as a department, we've benefited greatly under the meet and confer agreements. Now, people may not agree to the level of which oversight was effective, but we had oversight. We had independent civilian review. It may not have checked every box or met every expectation that everybody wanted, but we had something. Officers benefited as well, whether it be through soft pay items, issues, or whether it be through the absolute understanding of what the next 5 years or 4 years held for them under a contract. So I understand how we got into the position that we're in, and I am pleased that negotiations are back underway, and I really am hopeful that we will find ourselves back under a meet and confer agreement that meets the expectations of all, because I think that we benefited a lot as a community being under meet and confer.
Well, and do you think that a lack of a contract has weakened citizen oversight in a way, or not? I don't know.
To me, where it came up, I guess the loss is that we no longer have the independent civilian review panel. And again, I know that there are folks that did not believe that that offered a lot, but it was a place where citizens could go to bring their complaints. It was a place that we brought every single critical incident that occurred in this community for an independent review by people that are not associated with the police department or the city in any way. We would give them a presentation of those incidents, and they could then provide feedback to the chief on their opinions on the incident, whether there was anything we could have done differently with training or tactics, or even if they had a discipline recommendation. So again, no system is perfect, but I think it offered something.
One more question, then we'll go to Uma. How will you ensure APD officers are trained to be guardians, not warriors? This issue has come about in large part due to a investigative series by Tony Plahetsky with the Statesman and KView about procedures at the training academy and cadets saying that they felt like the training was much too aggressive. So, guardians, not warriors.
Sure, and I think it's timely. This is a discussion that's occurring in communities across the country. And I guess one thing that we do is at the end of every single cadet class, we do an evaluation of that class, things that went well, things that could be done differently, things that we need to change, either based on new case law or just based on new best practices across the country. I've said this before, that I do believe that the Austin Police Department trains our men and women to be guardians, because 99% of what we do is within that guardian role. It is helping and it is serving, but we have a duty to train them to be able to defend themselves and others, because we all know that police officers do get called to situations that have deteriorated to such that they are going to have to go in and restore order, and sometimes that will involve coming up against resistance and having to use force. So we have to train them how to use force and how to do so appropriately, because that is the situations that we do get called into. But I think the way that I've said this before and what I believe is we train the men and women of the Austin Police Department to be guardians, but they have to be able to be, and I don't like the word, but it's the word that's out there, they have to be able to be that warrior in the moment that they have to do so to defend somebody else or themselves.
Hello. There we go. Do you think that the training, the complaints about the training were valid?
I think we looked at them, and I was aware of one of the circumstances. When I got called by the reporter that was doing that story and we had our initial conversation, I was very aware of one of the circumstances. And at the time when it happened, I was so concerned, I sent 2 assistant chiefs to the hospital, and the individual that was involved in that incident had already been released, and it didn't match anything that we had heard. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it was all without merit. I think that the men and women at the Austin Police Department compete to have the opportunity to serve as an instructor. They go through interviews and through oral boards, and we put them there for a reason. When they're teaching a class, there are often other instructors that are in the class with them. So is it possible that a comment is made during training that I would not approve of? I'm sure that it's possible, but I do not believe sitting here today that there is a culture at the academy that is not in line with best practices, with policing, with my expectations in this community. But I think with any organization our size, there's always going to be maybe that one incident, that one person, and that's what we look out for, and then we make change if we have to.
Uma?
Thank you, Judy. how can Austin Police Department ensure what happened to Breon King will not happen again to people of color in our community?
So Breon King is one of those cases for our department that we have to own, and we have to get better from that. I think everybody understands the history of that incident, so I don't necessarily need to go through all of that. We've done a lot since the Breon King incident in this community. First off, we've revamped the entire way we review use of force incidents. So we now have a use of force incident that goes through the entire chain of command. And then depending upon what level use of force it is, it'll either go to a separate board, a use of force board, a force review board, to get a second look to make sure that it was consistent with our policies and our practices and there isn't something that we should be doing different. If it's a lower level of force, what we did, as in the Breon King incident, when it goes through that chain of command and it's signed off by the sergeant, the lieutenant, and the commander, it is then sent over to a completely different commander who has no link to that chain of command for them to do an independent review to make sure that they agree with the review that was done at the chain of command level. We do the random audits of the videos. I think that the implementation of the body-worn camera program here in Austin was long overdue, but we wanted to make sure that we were implementing technology that worked for our community. I didn't want officers to have to get out of the vehicle and think about turning on a camera, because the one time that they would forget to do it would likely be that one time they were getting out in a very critical incident, and that's really the video that we would want the most. And so we waited to get that. The fact that we have that now gives us another lens, another view into what's going on the street and how those interactions are going. So my assurance to the community, or I guess my feedback would be, we have put in several steps to ensure on the back end we're reviewing these incidents. On the front end, from the training, again, we will continue to review the training. We've implemented a de-escalation policy. We're implementing de-escalation training. And again, we're looking at national best practices that are available through the DOJ and through PERF, looking at what we can implement here in Austin, just really to make our policies and our training better.
Just because all of us aren't in law enforcement, tell us what PERF stands for.
My apologies. PERF is the Police Executive Research Forum, and it's based out of Washington, D.C., and it really is the leading experts as far as a think tank for progressive policing.
All right, I have a question here, two questions that kind of relate and also echo some of the concerns that our quality of life commissioners talked about. How do you ensure that all people are fairly represented and communicated with, and how do you plan to continue working positively with the immigrant community?
So we have many communication platforms at the department trying to get information out, whether it be just through the social media or through news releases, through interviews that we do, again, trying to communicate with the community. We make ourselves regularly available also to, Univision. We do interviews with them as well. SB4 hit this community hard. SB4 really changed how we interact with the community, because we had to work that much harder to maintain trust within our immigrant community because of the fear that they had that we would be used as agents of the federal government that could then result in their potential deportation if they were to cooperate with us. And that's a challenge for any community. And so we really put ourselves out there. We held meetings across the immigrant community. We were in their churches. We were in their neighborhood meetings. Anywhere they would allow us, we would go and talk to them. And really what our message was, and I think I coined it in this, saying that we're worried about your safety, not your status, because that's what's so important. If we lose the cooperation within our immigrant community because of that fear, what happens is they become ripe for victimization, because the criminals in our community will know that they can prey upon the immigrant community really with impunity, because they're not going to come forward and report it because of that fear of deportation. And whenever there is one part of our community that is less safe, our entire community is less safe. So we really went to a tremendous degree to try and educate that community. And there were reports that came out from both Houston and Los Angeles in the wake of these laws, and what did they see in reporting within their immigrant community. And they were seeing tremendous decreases in reporting. We conducted one 6 months afterwards looking at our reporting of victimization within the Hispanic community. And what we saw in Austin was we actually saw an increased reporting where they were the victim in incidents, but we wanted to normalize that to make sure we just didn't have an increase across the board. At that same time, we actually had either equal or drops in both African American and Anglo reporting. So I think the work that we did, I'm hoping it maintained the level of trust that we had and maybe built it, and we remain open to that. We made ourselves available to the Muslim community. We've been in the mosques. We've talked to them about these same issues, about the importance of maintaining this relationship, because we've seen actions taken against those of the Muslim faith, just as close as the mosque burning down outside the city, and then up in Pflugerville where the mosque was desecrated. So we understand our role and importance of really working with all of the diverse communities here in Austin.
And that kind of covers the communication aspect of it. But what about representation on the police force, making sure all communities are really represented in the men and women who serve with you?
We strive to be reflective of the community that we serve because, again, I think people want to be working with a department that represents and reflects them. Currently, the Austin Police Department is 69% Anglo, 8% African American, 20% Hispanic, and 3% Asian Pacific Islander. When we look at the city demographics, what the latest will show is that as a city, we're 48% Anglo, and we are 7% African American, 34% Hispanic, and 10% Asian. And so the areas where we're most challenged is within the Hispanic community, where we're at 20% and our community is at 34%. And then within the Asian Pacific Islanders, we're only 3% and our city is 10%. So we really focus our efforts on recruiting at those events where we think that we can bring in demographics to really be reflective of our community. Now, the one challenge that we really have here that, again, it's a national challenge as well, and that's on gender. We are 10% female in the Austin Police Department. We want to do better. We hold recruiting events specifically geared towards recruiting females into this profession. Here as a department, actually our female officers on their own accord put out a calendar last year highlighting just all of the roles that females can play in modern law enforcement. So we're taking steps that we can take to try and bring in diversity into the police department so that we can reflect the community we serve.
Uma.
1.5 years after APD closed the crime lab, can you release the assessments that have been done, and what is your vision for the crime lab of the future?
Crime lab has been another issue that's reared up a lot, and I know a lot of changes have been made, so talk about that.
Sure. So that was really the first major issue I had to take on when I took over the department. And I found myself within the first 2 weeks of taking over as chief, shutting down the DNA lab based on the concerns that existed within the criminal justice community, within the defense bar of some things that had taken place. We had, I believe, 17 audits over a period of 14 years, none of which identified any problems with the science that was taking place in the lab. They always uncover maybe some administrative issues and things that you can do better. But as far as the science we were practicing, when we got that Texas Forensic Science Commission audit that uncovered these issues that were brought to my attention, that was the first we had heard of that, even though we had been audited so many different times. I know that created some issues between the Forensic Science Commission and ASCLD, which is the governing agency for labs, because they had been accrediting us. And so that created a lot of concern between those two entities. But it was the right thing to do, because we had a lab that had really lost the trust of the community and our criminal justice partners. And so I made a difficult decision that was unpopular with some, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. We then put together a work group that consists of leaders from both the city and the county, the district attorney's office, the county attorney's office, the defense bar, members of the police department, and then members of the groups that serve our survivor community from sexual assault, because we want to make sure we get it right. The DNA lab is up and running right now. For those that may not know it, what we did is we entered into an agreement with the Texas Department of Public Safety. We had we had a great lab. It was up to speed. It was a modern lab. We brought in DPS, and they actually run the lab for us. It's run under their leadership, and it's run under their direction, and they're working on APD cases because it was important that we be able to process our cases and not slow down any further. What the work that's being done right now is we're bringing in an outside group to review two different things. First of all, a look backwards and kind of an assessment of what happened and how did we get there. It's the Quattrone group, but then also it's an ongoing discussion of what will the crime lab, Austin's crime lab, look like in the future. Will it return to the Austin Police Department and fall back under our leadership, Will it stay with the Texas Department of Public Safety, or will it be some other hybrid? We don't know. I can say that we made a tremendous hire here at the end of last year, a lady named Dr. Dana Kadavi, who has been a professional in the DNA arena for, I believe, a couple decades now. She was running a local DNA lab here. She's PhD credentials and is a true expert, and she's done some tremendous work out there in our lab. So I'm confident in the work that they're producing now. And I'm also pleased that we were able to work through the backlog of sexual assault kits that had grown really almost over the past 30 years. And this wasn't something that was just happening here in Austin. This was something that was happening across the country, because 15, 20 years ago, you may have a sexual assault case that happened in your community, and if the suspect came in and confessed, and the case was brought to trial, that kit may never have been tested because the suspect confessed and you got the conviction. But what we were failing to realize was really the importance of the CODIS system, of getting that DNA profile and loading it into the CODIS system so that if that person got out and then reoffended, we'd know who they were. And that's all this work that you're seeing being done on a national level right now to clear out our backlogs. I think that there were some really bad messages that were sent to survivors of sexual assault, which we recognize as one of the most underreported crimes in any community. You can just look at the paper either this morning or yesterday, I forget, there was an article on how underreported it is. And I think if we have barriers that exist in the system where it would give a survivor the impression that either we don't believe them or we're not taking it seriously or we don't care enough, then we're not doing it the right way. So I'm pleased the steps that we've taken. It was unfortunate we got in that situation, but we have a lab that's running under DPS supervision right now, and we've got a group that's working towards setting it up for the future.
Another question from the audience.
Thank you, Judy. Before I read the question, just a quick reminder. We have iPads where you can just go ahead and fill in more of your input if you want to. They are right at that corner where you see Marion, and they are ready to go. Okay? All right. Here's the next question. What can be done in both policy and training to reduce the number of arrests for low-level crimes that disproportionately affect the poor and people of color?
Low-level crimes.
So we're talking about diversion, and I think I talked a little bit about that in my opening comments, although I don't think I closed that loop because there was a second part and I don't think I got to it. I currently sit on a work group with both the district attorney and the county attorney. That's exactly what we talk about as diversion. What options do we have to divert people from the criminal justice system? Criminal justice system is not the best at reforming conduct. It's not the best at stopping recidivism. And so we look for other opportunities. In Austin, we've got a cite and release program here that we've implemented over the years for low-level misdemeanor violations. But we always look to expand. I see Chris Harris in the office. We met probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this was something that Chris brought up, is what are our opportunities to expand cite and release to either higher levels of drug possession or other crimes. And so this is a discussion that is ongoing with myself and those that are leading the courts, both the district attorney and the county attorney. And as police chief, what would be important to me is whatever program we would put in place, whatever we would accept as a diversion, we have to see that it's successful in that area of recidivism. We want to make sure that it's effective if we're going to implement this in the community. And so we've been working and had studies done on what's happening here in Austin. We're currently looking at our data right now on cite and release from the past year to look at those cases that were eligible for cite and release but did not get a cite and release. What were the circumstances behind that? Because I think we have a policy that works for today. I think it can be improved and expanded as we identify programs that will be appropriate and will really correct behavior. But we need to understand that we're doing what we should be doing today appropriately, and anything we would expand to in the future will actually change conduct, and we won't end up with a problem, a higher incidence of recidivism.
One of the questions that we had sent in prior to tonight by the community is questioning the unprecedented number of police on desk duty or administrative leave this spring. Why is that, and do you consider that a blemish?
We had 2 incidents that occurred, I believe both were in March, and these were officer-involved shootings that for our community and really many communities were really unique, just in the number of officers that were involved in that critical incident. We had an incident that occurred down in South Austin. It involved I guess, somewhat distraught person who ended up in the back of a taxi cab, who ended up commandeering the taxi cab, taking it. We ended up in a pursuit with this individual. The incident drug on for quite a while, so a lot of officers got involved in that. By the time the cab came to a stop down in South Austin, there was an elongated standoff with that officer, again, trying to negotiate the situation down. He was in possession of a firearm. It ultimately ended up in an officer-involved shooting, and given that there had been so much time that had elapsed, there were so many officers that were present when that threat posed itself, that those that were on the team that were on the lethal portion, when we put a team together, there will be officers that have lethal cover, less lethal cover, and those that are hands-free that can go and grab. We ended up with 7 officers that fired their weapon, and our policy is that any officer that fires their weapon goes on administrative duty until we understand what happened in that incident. We get an initial review of that incident, and we get those officers cleared through our department's psychologist to make sure that we believe it's appropriate to put them back to work. A few weeks later, we had an incident, and it involved 5 officers. And again, these were 2 incidents that were back-to-back. I cannot point to a time in the department where that's happened. Officer-involved shootings, there's not a pattern to it or a timing to it. If we look at the end of 2017, we went 6 months without an officer-involved shooting, and within a period of 48 hours, we had 2. So they're just very dynamic situations when they occur, but we have an absolute policy that officers that are involved in a critical incident are placed on administrative leave until we get that initial review and we get a clearance from the staff psychologist. And so our department is structured and staffed over in our Special Investigations Unit to handle these cases as they come up. But when those 2 cases came up with the number of officers that were involved, it kind of overwhelmed the system, and it took us a while to push through those.
Another question. This is from the audience. The Colony Park community has not been served equitably in the past. What can you do to change that, ensure that we are a priority? Someone from the Colony Park community.
Well, that's important to hear, because as I spoke earlier, we can talk about being the 5th safest city all day long, but we know there are pockets of the city that are more safe, pockets of the city that are less safe, and that they feel different. So we're structured to provide police services to this entire city. So if there is a portion of the city, especially if it's where we're at today, then number one, I need to know about it, but we have district representatives that are responsible, and that's really the initial point of contact. But our patrol officers that patrol this region, they should be a regular occurrence in your neighborhood. You should see them driving through. So if you're not getting the level of coverage that you've either had in the past or you believe that you need, or if there are crime trends that you're seeing that we may not see within the data yet, please call us, call your district rep, call your commander, call me personally. My number is on the website along with my email, and we will respond, because that's the thing as we drive our really pushing towards neighborhood level policing, building the relationships at the neighborhood level. This is what's important to get this kind of feedback. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'm sure that's the same advice you give to any neighborhood who feels like the community isn't getting the safety issues that address that it needs to be addressed. So.
Right. I mean, we focus our limited resources in those areas where the data tells us that we have a problem or that we believe we can have the best impact on crime. The reason that we're kind of revamping how we're doing community policing and really trying to get down into that neighborhood level is because we don't always realize some of the softer issues, if I can call them that impact the quality of life in a neighborhood. They may not show up on a dashboard that we look at when we're looking at violent crime and property crime and all of that. So that's what's important to us, and that's what we're focusing on right now, is building those relationships so that, and I don't know who put forth that note today, you don't have to raise your hand, but you should know who your district representative is. And if not, then we need to make sure we're pushing that information out, and we need to make sure that that's information that's readily available to you, because there's not anybody in this room that should not know who is your first point of contact from a district representative perspective. And then what I talked about earlier, making smaller sectors for officers to patrol so they get more connected, that's the purpose as well. We're hoping that officers will also get to know the community members at a more personal level.
Homework for everyone tonight, because I don't know who my district representative is. Uma.
What can APD do to reduce use of force against people suffering from a mental health crisis?
We had a lot of questions come in prior to tonight about mental health issues in the law, so go ahead.
I think that this is an issue that is across the country. We saw really the deinstitutionalization, a lot of folks that had mental health issues over the decades when hospitals were closed and people were put out on the street. And a lot of those people end up being homeless or really on their own because they don't have support systems. And based on that, we end up having encounters with them. This is where we have to continue to work as a department to try and link these people with services where we can. I talked a little bit earlier during my opening comments about diversion, about bringing more resources to bear. I think that one of the programs that we put in, although it was not specifically focused on the mental health community, it's our host team that reaches out, the Homeless Outreach Street Team, because we know that a lot of the homeless here in Austin, on any given day, if you do a count, they'll tell you there's between 2,000 and 3,000 people that are experiencing homelessness in Austin on that day. And over the course of a year, between which study you look at, during that year, we will have had between 7,000 and 10,000 people that at some point or another experienced homelessness. Many of them are suffering from either a mental health issue or a drug addiction or both. And so I think that this was something that we've put in here in Austin to try and address this issue. We have officers that are dedicated towards meeting with these individuals, meeting them where they're at, and trying to link them to services that can let them get better so that we don't end up having to have a call for service on them. We can try and link them with appropriate services. Sometimes it's as simple as getting them to DPS to get them an ID card so they can apply for a job, so they can start making some money and they can start supporting themselves. Sometimes it's a little bit more involved. It's linking them with a social service provider. So as a community, we need to all come together and work towards that. The police department absolutely has a role in this because, again, we're the front line and we're the ones that are really going to be interacting in that moment of crisis. And to that extent, we have a duty to continue to train our officers. Every single officer of the Austin Police Department gets the basic 40-hour training on mental health as required by the state. We've got another entire group of officers that gets an additional level of training, and then we have a CIT division as well. Austin is a little bit different than other cities in that we're home to the state hospital. So we have a lot of people that are brought to Austin, to the state hospital for treatment, and unfortunately when they're released, they sometimes don't go back to the communities from which they came, and if they go back into a crisis, they're in a city that they don't know, they don't have a support system, and they're more likely to fall through the cracks. So there's a lot that we've done, but this is something that we pay attention to because there's a lot more that we need to do.
Another audience question. As a career member of APD, how do you propose to have an outside or different perspective?
That's interesting because I expected that question to come up, is how can you be a change agent if you're from the inside? And I would go back maybe to some of the comments I made earlier that I had one question for then City Manager Elaine Hart when she asked me if I would take over when Chief Acevedo went to Houston. And that was, are you looking for a chief or are you looking for a placeholder? Because I can't sit still and idle and just leave things the way that they are, and nor could our community afford to have a police department that's idling. And I think that I have made changes. I have made organizational changes. I have made policy changes. I am more than willing to take a critical look at our department, a department I am proud of, but I recognize that just like every other police department across this country, we are not without our fault, and we need to be willing to take that critical look and make improvements where necessary. So I would just ask whoever has concerns over that to just look at what I have done. I have not left things in place. I have been willing to kick over rocks, and I've been willing to make change, and a lot of that has also been done in partnership with community groups.
Given the diversity within the Asian community, would you expand Asian culture training to be more inclusive of Asian subgroups?
That's actually an interesting question. And what that's going to make me do is go and look at how inclusive on the whole are we for all of the different subgroups in Austin. Because I agree, when I gave the numbers out earlier today, Austin is 10% Asian, but the department is 3% Asian. And we know that there are some cultural barriers there of people wanting to join law enforcement. And I think that that's something that I need to look at as far as the training that we're giving officers, as far as the understanding of the many different cultures that fall within the Asian culture, to see if we're not including everybody. And if so, then we need to. We train our officers with the community immersion program. Every cadet that goes through the academy, when they graduate the academy and they go into their field training portion, part of what they will do is they will do a neighborhood portfolio almost, where they will do a study of the neighborhood that we've assigned them to better understand the community in which they're going to serve, because we understand the cultural differences. I talked about this a little bit earlier, especially from the immigrant community and the countries that they may have come from, where policing just may not be what it is here in America. We understand the importance of that, and so that's something that I will take a look at, because it is a growing population, and it is something that we need to make sure that we're doing all we can do to train our officers to.
When it comes to the police contract, I think there's a lot of inside baseball stuff that most people don't really grasp. And one of the questions is interesting. Are you a member of the Austin Police Association? If so, how are you able to separate yourself and the city's wants from those of the association?
Sure. Yes, I am a member of the association. Chief Acevedo was too. I've been a member my entire career, but when we went through contract negotiations, not this current session, but actually the one 5 years ago, I was an assistant chief at that time, and I was assigned to the negotiating team. But I sat on the city side of the table. And yes, it's an interesting position that you find yourself in, because to an extent, you're negotiating against your best interest at times from a personal perspective if you're just thinking about you. When we take on these roles that we take on and we agree to join the executive team, it's an appointment. It's not a promoted rank that we test for. It's an appointment, and there's expectations that come with that. And part of that is realizing that you are now a part of management. I don't think that management goals and officers' goals are always in conflict. I think when it comes to some of the issues, though, there are. I have specific wants that I want to see in the next contract in the area of oversight and accountability, and they may run contrary to what the membership may want, but that's why we go to the table and that's why we negotiate that out. So it really is just, you have to have the willingness to put the importance of the department, and really, I think the benefit that you get being an executive in the department, a lot of officers have the view, but every day your view is that 30,000-foot view, and it's looking out for the entire organization, it's looking out for the entire community, and that relationship that's so important. And so you just have to separate yourself.
What do you believe the relationship should be between APD and the police monitor?
You know, I was the commander over internal affairs for a portion of my career, and at that time Cliff Brown was the police monitor, and we had an excellent working relationship. That is not a relationship that has to be controversial. The monitor plays a role. Back when we were talking about the contract negotiations, when the membership passed the contract and it ended up going before council, I remember talking about the system that we had in place. That system was one that, if it is working, if the police monitor is doing their job and holding the police chief accountable, making sure that in that room when those interviews are taking place, it may be an APD sergeant that's asking those questions, but there's a member of the monitor's office that's present and that's overseeing that, there should be an immediate conversation that takes place if we're not asking the right questions, if we're asking leading questions, if we're not asking all of the questions. And again, we have to accept the fact that if we're going to be seen as legitimate, and we're going to be entrusted with policing ourselves, we have to be willing to have that outside view, whether it be the police monitor's office that is still in existence, even without a contract, or whatever form of civilian oversight we put in place based on the ongoing contract negotiations. And I think everybody understands that if we're going to be entrusted with policing ourselves and holding ourselves accountable, that's an important role that gives the process credibility. There has to be an outside view. It cannot only be internal with the police department.
This next question deals with transparency, so this is a good segue. What can be done to increase transparency and to respond more quickly to public information requests?
Yeah, we've got a lot of public information requests that we get as a department, and I don't
Darn
have
media does it all the time.
Yeah, yes, they do. I don't have the number in front of me right now, but we've seen a multifold increase in the requests for information, and we are just simply backlogged because, again, we've only got a certain number of people that are able to do this work, that do this work for us, and that fulfill these requests. I think that it's something we have to look at from a staffing perspective to get more personnel in that area so that we can respond more timely. I know that when we get requests from the media, especially for on-camera interviews on stories that are really timely, I think we meet those deadlines pretty well, whether it's the chief's office or whether it's the commanders or even the officers that are part of the PIO team. We recognize the importance of that. What is a greater challenge for us is when it requires us to go and do a bunch of data analysis. When we've got to go and pull data from our system, and it might be one of those data sources that you push a button and it prints it out. You might actually have to work with the data to collate it, to answer the questions that have been asked. So I sit here and tell you, we're committed to being as transparent as we can. We are challenged in the area of resources, as well as some of the requests, just the amount of work that has to go into producing the responsive material.
Do you see a logical way that you could increase transparency? Would it require more staffing?
When we're looking, and I think if the question was getting at the backlog of PIRs or just simply the time it takes sometimes, if you filed a FOIA, an open records request, and you're not getting a response for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, I mean, I absolutely understand that, and I own that. I don't have an immediate solution for you today just because of the sheer backlog we have in that area. It is something that we pay attention to. We have increased the staff in our records division over the past couple of years, and it is something that we're paying attention to.
This is my last question, Judy. What can you do to train officers for the realities of 21st century policing? Will you require all officers to take ongoing training on racism?
You know, that's a great question. We actually are looking at something right now. I had the opportunity to go through Undoing Racism training this past year. I went with a couple of the other assistant chiefs, and what we're working on right now with Brian Oakes of, again, the Equity Office, the city's working on trying to bring in Undoing Racism training for the city, to make it available for more of the city departments. Being a department of 1,900 people and that being a multi-day training, I don't know that I'll get every officer through that training, but what I'm committed to is what can we find, what can we glean from that training that we can put together to really to instruct all of our officers. We just this past year put every officer through fair and impartial police training. That was an investment of time. If you think about 1,908 officers, each dedicating 8 hours to one class, you know, you're looking at the productive time of really 5 or 6 officers for an entire year. But that was a worthwhile investment because it's an important topic. So we will work to identify what we can glean from a multi-day training and put that in something that is beneficial to our officers. I'm going to look at what Brian Oakes and his team are putting together for the city and work with them to see what can we put into our academy, again, to better train our officers. We're committed to the de-escalation training we're doing right now. We're doing use of force training. We've done the fair and impartial police bias training, and I think that this is the next evolution, and that is something that we will look at. I just at this point don't know what it will be because the program that we have right now is multi-day, and that would be a difficult stretch at this time.
I have some good news and bad news for you. The good news is we're out of time. We've been talking for more than an hour, and our broadcast is about to end. The bad news is we're going to do this again. Actually, great. I think that's wonderful news.
Yes,
and it makes my heart happy to see such a great turnout here and to know how much the city cares about this position and just about the city's future. And Austin has always had a big heart and cared about the way our city progresses and moves forward. Thank you so much, Chief Manley, for sharing your vision and answering a lot of tough questions. And thank you all for coming out tonight. May 17th. There are a lot of community forums happening this week, and I'm going to turn it back to the city manager to say goodbye. But what I wanted to let you know was on May 17th, at the KLRU Studios, the place where I call home, we will be hosting another community forum like this. Only this one will be televised. So that's May 17th on Thursday, when we'll have information on the KLRU website, and I know that the city will have more information. We'll be doing this one more time, allowing a live audience, though, instead to be asking the questions. So before we say goodnight, I want to turn it back over to the city manager for some words.
Well, first of all, let's thank Judy for that great... We really appreciate your willingness to be here and help facilitate that dialogue. I want to do a couple announcements. One is just a reminder about that event on the 17th. There's also ways that you can give us feedback online via text message, calling 311. Even though we're going to be formally ending our broadcast of this specific forum right now, I'm hoping to pull an audible right now and just see if Brian Manley would be willing to stick around for another 15, 20 minutes. And in case there are questions that were in the audience that weren't asked, we are happy to take a few more questions as well. So we'll formally end the broadcast. You feel free to step down, Judy. There is food in the back. There's some drink. But I didn't want it